All right, let's talk about inheritance. So I'm not going to go too deep into the theory behind inheritance. I'm just going to talk more about how to actually implement it in our classes. So I'll talk about the child constructor, which is inheriting aspects of the parent class. Or sorry, I'm talking about the child class, which is inheriting aspects of the parent class. And I'll talk about the child constructor specifically. So we can make different types of animals their own class, like I mentioned it before. But we still want it to do everything the parent class does, plus more. So that's why we are deriving the parent class to the child class. So for the child in the constructor, or sorry, in the class declaration, we want to use the keyword extends plus the name of the parent class after the declaration and before that open bracket. So this lets the compiler know that we are basically copying everything over from the parent class into this new class. And then we're going to just, change and add things on top of that as we want to. So in the constructor, we are going to use the keyword super to call the constructor of the parent. And then on top of that super call that we're going to use kind of as a method within the constructor, we are going to, add for any additional variables that we might have. Just for the child class, we're just going to add those on to the end. So you'll see what I mean in a second. And we can pass parameters to the super call if necessary, because the super is just the constructor of the parent. We just call it super to clarify that it is, the class that we're deriving from. So here I have a class called frog.java. And so I've said public class frog extends animal, right? Because a frog is kind of like a more specific version of an animal. So I want to copy everything I've already made in my animal class that we've been using as examples. And basically just make that the starting point for the frog class. And since I made my variables protected, they are going to be copied into the child class. Because remember, the protected variables continue to any derived classes, but just not any unassociated classes. If I had made my variables private, I would not be able to inherit them. So I'm going to add another variable just for frog. It's going to be an integer, and it's going to be the number of bumps on the frog. So I'm going to call it protected int number of bumps, and I'm not going to initialize it because it isn't an actual object yet. This is just the blueprint. And then I have my constructors here. I should have put a comment in there to clarify that. My mistake. So we have public frog, right? And then within that, we are calling super parentheses. So what this does is this just calls the parent, the animal. Basically, it would be just like calling the animal constructor, as if we just said animal parentheses. But we use super to remind ourselves that we're calling the parent, whatever the parent class of the frog class is, which we can go up and look at our extends keyword and see that it is animal. So the really useful thing about this is that we don't have to instantiate anything from the parent class if we use the super thing. All we have to do is add on the initialize the variables that are exclusive to the frog class that aren't in the animal class. And in this case, that's just the number of bumps. So we're going to say this dot number of bumps equals 0. And again, this is not necessary. I just like to be consistent. And then we have a parameterized constructor called public frog. Again, it has the same name, but that's okay since it has a different number of parameters and different types of parameters. And we want the string of the species name, an integer for its lifespan, and an integer. I just called it new number because I didn't want to make it a super lengthy name. But that's just going to go to the number of bumps. So all these parameters are being passed into the constructor for frog, but we can kind of lay off two of them back, kick them back to the constructor for animal by calling super again, because we've already written the code for that. We might as well use it. So we can go super and then pass the new species and new lifespan as parameters into that. But since the number of bumps is something special to this frog class, we're just going to have to say this dot number of bumps equals new number. And there you go. It's pretty much the same as the constructors before, just with the utilization of that super keyword and then the extends keyword in the class declaration.